Hi, I'm Allie. Join me to learn how to use Hubble Stitch to bezel a Rivoli. You can make this pendant or connect to keep going and making a larger design. Remember, if you need any materials, go ahead and look below the video to shop with us online. There's links there in the description. Gather up your beadboard and your materials and let's get started. So one of the easiest ways to bezel, in my opinion, whether or not you're bezeling a cab, a Rivoli, a stone, is to do Hubble Stitch. So if you're not familiar with Hubble Stitch, you can go ahead and watch some of our other Hubble Stitch videos that we'll put links to in the description of this project as well as on the landing page. And we're going to be doing Hubble and creating a bezel around an 18mm Rivoli. So here's the back of it. Here's the front. You can see I have another project in mind where it's going to be useful to know this simple start. We are going to be doing an 18mm Rivoli, and I have the Mystic Juicy Peach here. Beautiful color, along with some 15-0s, 11-0s, and 8-0s. If you need the exact, again, look in the description. We're going to do Hubble Stitch and we're going to do 12 units. I have a stop bead on about 4 feet of size 6 green dragon thread along with a size 11 needle. We are going to be doing Hubble. That is 2 beads, 11, and 1 bead 8. The 8s are going to be at the top and the bottom of our Hubble units. We're going to sew back up through bead number 1. And as we sew back up through bead number 1, we are then going to add 1 more gold bead and sew down bead number 2. If you have not done Hubble Stitch before, this is 1 Hubble unit. We add 3 beads, we sew back around through bead number 1, add bead number 4, and come down bead number 2. We add beads number 1 and 2, which are my 11-0s. You can see you can do it with multiple sizes. Bead number 3, which is an 8-0. I push these all down to the last Hubble unit, share, and go through bead number 1, which is going to create my next Hubble unit, and then I'm going to add my 4th bead and sew down bead number 2. Hubble is different from a peyote stitch or a herringbone stitch where you're sharing some of the beads from one stitch to another. With this one, they are just connected by the thread itself. You can see they look like little tiny foosball players. We're going to add, again, 3 beads, 2 of my 11s, 1 of my 8s. You could be doing this all with 8s if you want to. This is just my easy method with 15s, 11s, and 8s. So back up through bead number 1. Make sure to push this 3rd Hubble unit right back towards the first 2. Add bead number 4, which will look like the helmet of my foosball player, and sew down his right shoulder pad, bead number 2. And there we have it. There's 3 Hubble units. We're going to do a total of 12 to go around the 18mm Rivoli. So keep building until we have 12 units. We have 3, so we have 9 more to go. Once you have 12 Hubble units long, it's time for us to join those 2 ends together into a round. When we join the 2 ends together, we're going to create a bezel by adding 15-0s in between the bottom of all of our units here. So you want to make sure when you're doing this, and if you need to, you can use 2 different colors of 8-0s. You want to make sure when you're looking at this that you're always going to be sewing through the bottom. How to realize and see that you're sewing through the bottom is to make sure that the 8-0 that's on the top sits inside the 11-0s. The 8-0 that's on the bottom sits to the exterior. So here we have one that's turned upside down. See how that's sitting in between the 11s? That is the top. Next guy is turned correctly, next guy is correct, next one is flipped. You want to make sure of this as you're doing this and getting to that center point. The first thing we're going to do is sew these 2 sides together to make our rounded loop. Our thread is currently coming out of unit number 12. We're going to go back to unit number 1, and we're going to sew through beads 1, 2, and bead number 3 and come out. We're going to go back then again through beads number 1, 4, and 2, and then come out. That's going to get us nice and tight. So here my thread's coming out of 12. I'm going into bead number 1. So you're almost forgetting that you ever did this first unit, and you're retracing these whole thread steps. So there I'm through bead number 1. I'm going to go through bead number 2 in that same Hubble unit. So skipping over that top bead number 4, go through bead number 3, pull that nice and tight so our ends match. And I'm going to go back up through bead number 1, just move that stop bead out of the way. And I'm also going to go through bead number 4. Go ahead and go down once again through bead number 2. And here's how we're going to get to the bottom. Instead of progressing over to my second unit of my Hubble stitch, we're going to sew into the bottom. We're going to go around and connect all of the bottom Hubble units and put a 15-0 seed bead between each. I'm going to grab a 15-0, go to the next 8-0 in the bottom, and sew through. You want to make sure, again, as you're doing this, that you're definitely getting the bottom bead and not the top. This unit here is turned a little bit to this upside down. I need to flip that before going in and sewing through that bottom 8. So make sure as you're going around that your Hubble units are not flipped, because naturally they will want to flip. I can see that next one is flipped also. I want to make sure that that helmet or that top of the body is at the top or the exterior, and that the legs of my foosball player are at the bottom. Going around, you're going to connect all 12 beads, making sure again that you have all of the Hubble units sitting correctly and that you're actually connecting all the interior. You'll notice I am not pulling super tight yet as I do this, because I'm just looking, oh, like this one here, I realized sewed through, and that was the bottom. I'm just pulling that out. If you're just learning Hubble stitch, don't be afraid to use 2 different colors, 8-0s, so you know which color you are joining into. Going in here, so go ahead, continue that stitch all the way around, connecting the bottom of those 12 units to get my nice base of my bezel. You can see it starting to form there, that interior line. Go ahead and continue the whole way around. You'll see here we have that interior line of gold 15-0s and silver 8-0s that we're connecting onto. Same deal here, get that whole interior line of your 15s. As I add in my last 15-0, I'm also sewing back through a couple of the 8-0, 15-0s just to make that back of the bezel really tight. If you want to, you can even go the whole way around to make sure that that bezel is very tight. So see how that lines up really nicely? Then you have those exterior 8-0s that we are going to add onto, that are going to sit and create the bezel that's going to wrap to the top. So what we're going to do now is we are going to sew from the bottom, or bead number 3 in our Hubble unit, back up through bead number 1, and then out bead number 4. So basically out one of the little helmets. This gets us ready then to add another Hubble unit on top. So we're doing a second row of Hubble around this exterior here. So the order for these Hubble units, and we're going to share that gold bead is now going to be the bottom of all of my new Hubble units. I'm going to add beads number 1 and number 2, which are going to be 2 more golds. I'm circling around through bead number 3 because it's already there. I'm coming back up through bead number 1, just like we've been doing with the Hubble, and see how it creates those bottom 3 beads. I'm going to add an 11-0 seed bead and sew down bead number 2. So just like we've been doing. So that's another Hubble unit that's attached to the base one. From here, 2 beads get added. You go to the far side of the 8, add bead number 3, sharing that bead number 3 from the row below it. Sew back up through bead number 1, so just as we've been doing. And then as you sew up through bead number 1 toward bead number 2, give a nice little tight pull, add bead number 4, which is your pink, and sew down through bead number 2. So we're doing a second row of Hubble stitch. 2 beads go on, sew through bead number 3 toward the second unit as you create this third. Back up through bead number 1 toward bead number 2 of that gold bead. And I usually turn it in my hand, but it's awkward to kind of hold it still for the camera for your view. When you come out bead number 2, add bead number 4 and sew down bead number 2. 2 more, so I'll let you see it again. And this time I'll hold it how I would normally hold it. 2 beads go on. I turn the project as I'm working on it. I sew back through bead number 1, pull nice and tight on the thread, add bead number 4, and sew down through bead number 2. So you can see that the units are sitting right on top of the previous units. I have 4 completed. Those foosball guys are sitting aligned, and I'm going to continue with 8 more sitting right on top of those gold beads at the base. As you're creating this second row of Hubble, you'll notice because you're using 8-ohs as opposed to 11s for beads number 1 and 2, that this is larger than the base row. Because of that, you're going to start to see that bezel take shape. So you have the beads that you're adding, give a nice tight pull, and see how it's automatically cupping and creating a nice surface for our Rivoli to sit inside. So coming down, you're just going to continue on. You do want that to happen. You're given a nice tight pull after each unit, and go ahead and keep going till we get ready to add unit number 1 from row 2 to unit number 12. So as you finish up unit number 12 in row 2, it's going to be just like the start. You're going to notice that you need to connect unit 1 and unit 12. To do so, we are going to do like we did before, sewing into bead number 1 toward bead number 2 from unit number 1. Then we're going to go into bead number 2 from unit number 1. Then we're going to go into bead 3 from unit number 1, which is that shared bead from the previous row. Back up through back up through bead number 1 in unit number 1. Give that nice tight pull. Sew through bead number 4, and there you are, finishing that unit. You'll notice now that that crystal will sit right in there. I have this nice mystic crystal, so it has that beautiful peach color on the back as well. And what we're going to get ready to do is use some smaller beads then as we do a third row of our Hubble stitch using 11s and 15s to hold it all in. Coming out the top here, you're coming out and you have an 11-0. Just like we did on the previous row, we're going to add 2 more 11s. Sew back through bead number 3. So you're sharing bead number 3 from the previous row. As you do so, just give a nice tight pull to tighten that up a little bit more. As you're back through bead number 2 or 3 rather, sew up through bead number 1. When you're coming out bead number 1, add a 15-0 and sew down through bead number 2. I'm going to take my Rivoli out of it here so you can see it from this angle. And there you go. That 15-0 goes right in the middle there. Once again, 2 beads go on, just like we did in the gold row. So through bead number 3 towards the last unit you just completed. That's going to pull in even more towards the center as we create this third Hubble unit, because we're going from 8-ohs to 15-ohs. Or sorry, 8-ohs to 11-ohs, and then 15s at the top. Bead number 4 is going to be a 15-0, and you sew down through bead number 2. Give that nice tight pull to pull that together and close. From here, once again, go in, add 2 beads, 1, 2, sew through bead number 3, which is going to be the 11-0 from the previous Hubble row. Give a nice tight pull there, tightening that up. So back up through bead number 1 that you just added, pulling that in towards that Hubble unit. Once you're there, grab a 15-0 seed bead and sew down through bead number 2. So you're going to go the whole way around, just like we did adding row number 2 with the gold, adding row number 3 with the 11s and the 15s. The 15s then are what we'll go in and we'll grab onto as we do our 4th row to hold in our bezel. Just like the previous row, you'll start to notice that there is a bezeling effect that is starting to happen. Again, this is because we're going from an 8-0 to an 11-0 for the Hubble stitch. However, this is super forgiving. You can see all of those beautiful Hubbles around. I'm going to continue. I have 1, 2, 3, 4 more units to do before going in and connecting unit 1 with unit 12. I'm not going to worry so much about putting my crystal in until I have 2 units left. Then I'll get ready to hold that in as I get ready to tighten and combine those 2 Hubble units. So as you finish up your Hubble, And go ahead if you want to put your Rivoli in there. And you'll notice that unit 12 is not connected to unit 1. So just like we did previously, it's going to seem like this is 1 just because it's on the right side, but this is 12 going back to unit 1. We're going to sew up through bead number 1 to connect them. We're going to sew through bead number 2, skipping over the 15, which is bead number 4. We're going to sew through bead number 3, which is that join bead from the unit below it. I'm going to give a nice little pull to get that nice and tightly in there. And then we're going to go back up through, sewing through bead number 1 and also through bead number 4. Give a nice tight pull to get that Hubble close. Now, I do not want to lose any of my crystal. That's one of the beautiful things of doing a bezel. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go from bead number 4 and I'm going to go down through bead number 2, just as if I was continuing on. Give a nice tight pull and tighten up all those Hubble units. From here, to tighten it up one more time, I'm going to continue to go around just like if I was doing a bezel, and I'm going to go through, up through bead number 1, and I'm going to go down through bead number 2. Go to the next Hubble unit, up through bead number 1, and pull as you go, down through 1, or up through 1, down through 2, turning along as you go and giving nice tight pulls. Up through bead number 1, not through bead number 4, which is the 15, just up through bead number 1, give it pull, down through bead number 2. This will just tighten that connection with all of the Hubble stitch as we go around. So I'm going to go around the whole piece and show you then how simple and forgiving this Hubble stitch is to hold in this 15-0 Rivoli. Already in there, and all we need to do is make the bail and get rid of our stop bead. After you're done tightening up that Rivoli in the middle, you'll want to exit through a bead number 3 in the Hubble stitch. So remember, we were going through 1 and 2, connecting to hold that Rivoli in place. I then went through bead number 3, which is my next 11-0 in that Hubble unit, and I'm going to go down to bead number 1 from the Hubble unit, which is going to be the gold bead right after. And then I want to go through bead number 3 of that Hubble unit. So one of those gold beads that's towards the back. From here, we're just going to do a nice simple ladder stitch bail. And I'm just going to go with a pattern of 111, 115, 111. And I'm going to sew over to the gold bead in the Hubble stitch unit that sits next to it. That happens to be right next to the stop bead there. From there, I'm going to go back through those 3 beads that I just added over the top of the gold bead. And then I'm going to ladder stitch that same pattern over and over again. So on go 3 beads. I'm coming out of the top of those sections of 3 beads. I'm going to sew into the bottom of that section of 3. Give a nice tight pull, and then go back through the 3 I just added. After this, do the same thing, groups of 3. Back through the 3 you already have on there, so you're coming out the bottom. We're going to go into the top. Let that lay down next to my last unit. So back through the 3 that I just added, and then continue on. I'm going to do about 20 rows of this, and we're going to bend it back to create our bail. So I'm actually going to stop with about 11 rows of my ladder so I don't make my bail huge. With the 10, you can see it would be right about there, so you can put it on a nice slide. What we're going to do now is we are going to bend this back and attach the first row of our ladder stitch to the last row of the ladder stitch. So my thread is currently coming out the last row of the ladder stitch. I'm going to go back to that first row, sew through the first row. So the thread's coming out the right, I'm going into the right to round that out behind it. And then I'm going to go back into that last row of ladder as well. So you're connecting, just like we did the Hubble stitch, connecting unit 12 to unit 1. We're connecting unit 11 to unit 1. From here, I'm going to sew back through unit 1 one more time. And I'm also at this time going to go over back through that gold bead. Tightening that up, I'm going to take my thread and needle through the 2 11-0s that sit underneath. I'm then going to go up through the gold that sits right on top that we've connected into, back through that ladder stitch one more time, holding that all together nicely. And then as I exit through that gold bead, I'm going to bring my thread and needle, and you can see how that just does that nice little turned over loop bail. I'm going to bring my thread and needle down towards that starter thread. My starter thread then and my ending thread are right next to one another. I can pull off that starter bead, grab my 2 thread ends, and simply tie them in a knot. Right over left and left over right. Remember, if you do this, it's always great to comment. If you do a 14 millimeter, let us know exactly how many stitches go around that. If you're doing a 12 millimeter, you're going to look at about 7 Hubble units for that guy. And once you have that nice and tight and tied, you're going to take your thread zap or your thread burner, burn down the thread edges, and then you'll burn them down close toward the project to get rid of them. And there you have it. Nice and easy, simple to do, and you have that on. This is a really simple way to do a bezel and really forgiving that you don't have to have the exact measurements, which comes really in handy also for some freeform stones. Thanks so much for watching this Hubble bezel video. Remember, if you do want to try it out in different sizes, go for it and comment below. If you do need an 18 millimeter Rivoli, any of the seed beads, or want to check out our stash, go ahead and look below the video in the descriptions to shop with us online. As always, you can give a little thumbs up and stay tuned for the next video.